Hanging wallpaper on a ceiling. A couple of considerations arise when planning the project. This project is going to be governed by the room next door, which has the same wallpaper on the ceiling. And so the layout, how you lay the wallpaper on the ceiling, is determined by the light coming into the room. But in this case, because the wallpaper is already up, the determining factor on how this is going to be laid out is going to be how this is laid out. You wouldn't want this wallpaper going in a different direction than this, since it's the same exact paper. But let's talk about that light factor. The room has natural light entering into the room from this side and its perpendicular counterpart. The light gets trapped in the texture if there are any raised portions on your ceiling like you see in this textured paper. Well, those little raised textures will create little shadows on your wall covering. And the way you lay out a room is to determine what part of the wall covering will trap the least amount of light and cast the least amount of shadows. In this case, you can see that if you put your view this way, or this way, or this way, or back to this way, it's the same thing all around. So in this case, it doesn't really matter which way you hang the paper, except that if more light is coming from this direction or from this direction, you would want the seams to run parallel with the greater source of light entrance. So, if most of the daylight time receives its light from this window, you want the seams going this way, parallel with the entrance of light. And the same would hold true for that window. So, this room only has one wall that gives us light. Fortunately for us, the seams will be going this way. But they will be going this way in here because they go this way in this room. The second consideration is that you want to determine the center of your ceiling. As you look close, you'll see a red laser line. I measured the distance between this wall and its opposing counterpart in 3 different locations: close to the window, the center of the room, and on the back of the opposing wall. I came up with a slight difference in the distance between this point and this, and the number of inches on the opposing wall from this wall to that wall. But it's a nominal difference. And so this is our center point, right where you see the laser. I made 3 marks on the ceiling. 1 on the left part, 1 in the center, and 1 on the right part. And I joined all of those marks with a laser and drew a pencil line. Now, I know where to lay my first piece and what line will be guiding the edge of the first piece so that the rest of the sheets will be at right angles with its perpendicular counterpart walls. Very important not to mess this up. If you're off, if you don't take the time to find the center of the ceiling, when you get to the edge, you will have wallpaper that runs off at the edge in a pizza pie slice-like fashion. And you will have a very ugly border. Ideally, you want the paper to be completely parallel with the edge of the wall against which the paper is hanging. Because if it's way off, and I'm talking 1/4 of an inch is way off, you will have a piece of wallpaper that everyone will notice is not straight. Can you imagine this luxury vinyl with this texture being off? Do you see what I mean here? That pattern that you see every 4 to 6 inches has to be consistent. Because if it's not, a casual glance at the wallpaper will reveal a crooked line. If your line were going like this, it would look terrible. That's how you plan the layout of a ceiling wallpaper installation. So we're hanging luxury vinyl. Now, many of you have written into me about the techniques of hanging this wallpaper on walls. For those of you who have done it, and those of you with whom I have spoken about the difficulties that arise from this type of paper, you know, even though it's good stuff, it's good material, it's not cheap, you know that the integrity of the drops does not stay well constituted once the wall covering gets saturated with glue. You know that it easily tears just from simple manipulation because of the beautiful texture and the softness of this material. And so it tears when you move it into place. And here's therefore what I suggest to you to do when you're hanging luxury vinyl. Glue the wall or the ceiling. Do not try to put the glue on the back of the wall covering unless you're doing a wall that's only 8 feet high or less. The time that it takes for the glue to get onto the wallpaper is too long. It takes at least 3 minutes to glue or paste a 10-foot drop of luxury vinyl. By the time you get the glue on the end of the sheet, the first part of the sheet has had a few minutes to become wet. This compromises the integrity of luxury vinyl in particular and makes it virtually impossible to stretch sometimes, as necessary, to get it into position. To avoid that problem, I suggest that you avoid saturating the backing, which is very amenable to receiving the paste and very amenable, therefore, to adhering to your wall or your ceiling, and sufficient to make the wall covering adhere for the life of the installation. Doing it this way, gluing the surface first, avoids the wall covering from becoming oversaturated and problematic during installation. Now, we can hold a dry piece of wallpaper in our hands rather than a saturated piece of wallpaper in our hands and do what is called dry hanging. So let's do that. After you get the sheet into place, you're now going to seek to eliminate any directional deviations that may have taken place as you're working overhead. And secondly, you want to take care of any air pockets that have formed from manipulation and wrinkling of wallpaper while you wipe it down. The best way to do that is to smooth it out at 90-degree angles from the center toward the edge. You don't want to be pushing air pockets down the whole path of the drop. You want to push them out the side. By the way, if you want to hang this successfully, my third piece of advice is to have another person to help you. Veteran installers would find it very difficult to do this alone. You're working overhead. You can't see the drop as easily as you can when you're doing it on a wall. You need another set of eyes, and you need someone to get you things while the wallpaper is adhering to the paste and the sealing. If you take too much time, the beauty of your installation will be compromised. Okay, let's get the next sheet up. Using one hand to put the pattern together and using the other hand to just hold about 2 feet of length of the paper in place, I would like you to zoom in to show them how easy it is now when you do it this way to make the pattern match. Just zoom in. You can see what I mean right here. We're perfectly matched here. Hello. We're perfectly matched here. But here, we start going, perhaps it's imperceptible to you, but we're a 1/16 of an inch off. Now, a 1/16 of an inch off isn't a lot. But when you get 8 feet down, it becomes 1/4 of an inch if you're not careful. As you can see, the luxury vinyl begins to mend together at the seams quite nicely. One of the benefits of luxury vinyl is that the seams form what I would call seals. Remember, the material is soft. That textured material is what I would call almost like a marshmallow. It's very soft. And at the seam, that soft material comes together quite nicely. And if you look at the seam, the seal between the right and the left becomes very, very nice and practically imperceptible. As the material is hung, you'll see that the color temporarily is changed. And all that is are marks of saturation. And that color differential will dissipate within about 3 to 6 hours, depending on the humidity level in your room. Don't let it worry you at all. So we're about 75% done with the ceiling. And as I go through each sheet, I put it up fairly quickly because remember, it's light material. But then I come down to the beginning of where I put the sheet up. And this is what I do. With a clean sponge, I both clean the wall covering and set it into position. As I do this, I relax the wall covering even more. And what happens is, if there's any bubbles, now is the time to deal with them. Not immediately right after you put up these sheets, but 5 to 10 minutes after you put them up. These are never going to come back. Once they manifest, they're so easy to get rid of. Now, if you're having difficulty getting a bubble out, take a little water and put it on the material. You always want to reduce the friction between your smoother or your hands, if you can, but definitely between the smoother and the material. You can't feel it, but it slides more. You don't want the paste that's on the front of the wall covering that has to get cleaned off to slow this down so much so that it rips this material. And so we get rid of the excessive water. This way we can move quickly with this. Now, the second thing I want to show you is this smoother. Please come in close. I want to show them this thing. You see this? This is not your typical smoother. I normally do not recommend Roman product smoothers because they're too soft. And this is not good for 90% of the material I hang. It's too flimsy. But for this, it's perfect. You may go into the hardware store and see one that looks like this, but when you go to bend it, it doesn't bend. That's the one that I use for most of my wallpaper hanging. You want one that's soft. And Roman company would offer this for all wall coverings. This is not good for most wall coverings, but it is perfect for this. Because if you try to install luxury vinyl with a smoother that's too stiff, this is what'll happen. You'll get it on the wall, into position, and it'll rip. This material is super delicate. So you want something soft, smooth. This is the way to go. So those are two suggestions that I give you. This way now, I want to go over my seam. I want to wet it. You see, if it were stiff, it would lift that seam up and possibly drag it, tearing it. Now, let's say this is your first time doing it. you write me notes, Spencer, I missed some of the bubbles. Not a problem. Go right to the bubble and penetrate the bubble. This is after it's all dry. You missed it. The glue is no longer wet underneath it. 3/16 of an inch hole. Push the air out. This literally mends together like human flesh. So, don't panic about little bubbles, but try to get them all out. Now, the last thing I want to show you is an important tool. It's more important than this. At least you can substitute this with your hands. The ladder that I'm using is about $125. If you're a do-it-yourselfer and you've opted to do this yourself, you're saving lots of money by doing it yourself. Can I suggest that you go out and spend $125? I think it's closer to 100. You buy this tool so that you can move about easily. If you try to use two ladders, it's not an easy task to accomplish to get any ceiling wallpaper up. Okay, so there you have it. I'll show you the final results. And the customer indicated, while I was hanging it, that he would like it painted. Because the walls, the ceilings in there, I did last year. And in order to make them match, because now the elements have gotten to the other room for a year, we're going to paint them, and I'm going to show you how to paint luxury vinyl. For those of you who will put luxury vinyl on your ceilings, this is what you can expect on every drop. First, I suggest that you dry hang it, which means you apply the glue to the ceiling. And I would even suggest that you do that on the wall. Dry hang this material. Then you put the sheet onto the surface from the beginning all the way until the end. Once you have it in place, you come back, you wipe it down, and you get out your bubbles while you wipe any glue that may be on the surface. The reason why I put this part into this video is to tell you that the seams will tend to overlap as the wallpaper absorbs the glue. Don't take a lunch break or leave the job for the day until you've given the seams an hour to be on the surface before you close the job for the break or for the day. You want to work those seams and make sure that 1 hour after they've been installed, they're still perfectly aligned and they're not swollen. The wall covering absorbs the moisture in the glue, and then the seams become engorged, slightly swollen. And this tends to make the seams overlap. If you're there and haven't taken your leave for the day or taken a break, you can deal with it. But if you should come back and those seams lifted because they got swollen and you weren't there to lay them down, well, you're going to have drops next to each other that one overlaps the other. So just make sure that you don't trust this wall covering to itself simply because you got the sheet down and it looks pretty good. Make sure that you sit with the wall covering for a while before you trust that it's all down.